A young innocent virgin was assaulted every day by her own father. An older, lonely millionaire man saw her pain in the dark and saved her. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us following. The city always woke up with the same ritual of thick fog and heavy silence. Helena walked the cobblestone streets with measured steps, as if each movement was calculated not to attract anyone's attention. At 17, she had learned the art of being invisible, a necessity that had become second nature after years of living under the roof of a man who had turned the house into a daily battlefield. The municipal market was bustling with activity on Saturday mornings, but Helena managed to move between the stalls like a shadow. Her hands, small and always cold, held the shopping list with small print and numbers that she had memorized from counting pennies so much. There was never enough money, and she had developed an almost mathematical ability to stretch every dollar to its limit. That particular morning, as she weighed potatoes on the rusty scale, Helena felt a different kind of gaze resting on her. It wasn't the kind that made her uncomfortable, the kind filled with malice or pity that she was familiar with. It was something more subtle, almost respectful, but intense enough to make her shoulders involuntarily tense. Gael Ferraz stood next to his black BMW, watching the hustle and bustle of the fair with an expression that was a mix of boredom and melancholy. At 42, he had built an empire in real estate, but lately he felt as if he were living a borrowed life, full of empty commitments and superficial relationships. Their divorce 2 years ago had been too amicable, without drama, without passion, just the mutual realization that they had become strangers sharing the same bed. It was when he saw Helena stumble slightly as she left the fruit stand, her heavy bags swinging dangerously, that something stirred inside Gail's chest. The girl seemed to carry the world on her shoulders, and there was something in the way she moved that awakened in him a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. Helena didn't immediately notice his approach. She was too focused on balancing her purchases and calculating whether the money she had left would be enough for bread. When she finally looked up and saw Gael standing in front of her, his hands outstretched to offer help, her first impulse was to back away. "Can I help you?" "With these bags?" His voice was low, slow, unhurried. There was nothing invasive in the tone, just a genuine offer that made Helena hesitate for a moment longer than usual. "No need, thank you." The answer came out automatic, rehearsed. Helena had learned early. On that accepting help from strange men usually came with a price she couldn't afford. Gael nodded respectfully, but didn't pull away completely. "Are you sure they look heavy?" There was something about his gentle persistence that unraveled Helena's carefully constructed defenses. She studied him quickly, expensive but not showy clothes, confident posture without being arrogant, eyes that didn't undress her but saw her. It was a strange feeling being seen as a person and not an object. "I can do it." She adjusted the straps of the bags more tightly, but one of them ripped at that exact moment, spilling oranges across the stone sidewalk. Without asking permission this time, Gael bent down and began to pick the fruit. Helena stood there for a moment, watching this clearly successful man kneeling on the dirty street, gathering his oranges as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What's your name?" he asked, as he placed the last orange into the makeshift bag he had made from his own shirt. Helena felt her heart race. No one asked her name. In the city, she was just Antonio's daughter, always defined in relation to the father who terrified her. Having someone interested in who she was as an individual was a completely new experience in Helena. The word came out almost as a whisper. "Helena," Gael repeated the name slowly, as if testing the sound in his own voice. "I'm Gael. It's a pleasure to meet you, Helena." At that moment, standing there in the middle of the fair, with people passing by and the sun finally breaking through the morning clouds, something fundamental changed in both of their universes. Helena felt for the first time in years that she existed as more than just a shadow trying to survive, and Gael experienced a feeling he had completely forgotten, the genuine desire to protect someone, not out of obligation or interest, but for something much deeper and inexplicable. When she finally mumbled a barely audible "thank you" and walked away with her bags rearranged, Gail stood in the same place for long minutes, watching her disappear into the narrow streets. There was something about that girl that had awakened a restlessness in his chest, a feeling that he had just found something he didn't even know he was looking for. Helena, for her part, walked home with a slightly different step. For the first time in a long time, she was not just running away from something, but carrying with her the memory of kind eyes and a voice that had spoken her name as if it had value. Neither of them yet knew that that chance encounter had planted the seed of a story that would forever change the course of their lives, connecting past and present in ways that not even the most fertile imagination could have foreseen. The following days passed with Helena carrying a strange restlessness in her chest. The encounter with Gail had planted something new in her monotonous routine of survival. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking about something other than her next meal or how to avoid arousing her father's wrath. She thought about the sound of his voice, the respectful way he had pronounced her name, the eyes that looked at her without judgment. Antonio Cardoso was a man whose life had broken him into poorly glued pieces. At 53, he carried the weight of bad choices and the bitterness of dreams that had never come true. His job at the mechanic's shop barely paid the bills, and alcohol had become his only way to numb the constant anger he felt toward the world and himself. Since the death of his wife Laura 3 years ago, that anger had found a specific target: Helena. The girl reminded him too much of the woman he had lost, and it was a daily torture. The same dark eyes, the same silent stubbornness, the same way she flinched when he raised his voice. But where Laura had had the strength to stand up to him in the last years of their marriage, Helena only absorbed his violence like a sponge, which somehow irritated him even more. That Tuesday afternoon, Helena was returning from school when she saw the black car parked near the square again. Her heart immediately raced, a mixture of nervousness and something she couldn't name. Gail was leaning on the hood of the vehicle, apparently waiting for her. "Hi, Helena," he greeted her with a small smile as she approached hesitantly. "I thought I'd offer you a ride home. It's starting to rain." Helena looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering quickly, promising one of the typical storms of the mountainous region. Her house was almost 2 kilometers away, a walk that would become difficult in the rain. Even so, she hesitated. "I don't want to bother you," the automatic response came out, but this time with less conviction. "It's no trouble. In fact, it would be my pleasure." Gail opened the passenger door with a gentle gesture. "I promise it's just a ride, no ulterior motives." There was something about his sincerity that shattered all the defenses Helena had built up over the years. She got into the car, immediately feeling the contrast between the soft leather of the seats and the hardness she knew at home. The air was permeated by a subtle, not overbearing masculine scent that made her feel strangely safe. During the journey, Gail asked simple questions about school and her plans for the future. Helena answered in monosyllables at first, but gradually she began to open up. It had been years since anyone had shown any genuine interest in her opinions, her dreams, or who she was beyond just an inconvenient presence. "Do you like reading?" he asked when she shyly mentioned that her favorite subject was Portuguese. "I like it." Helena looked down at her hands clasped in her lap. "But I don't have many books at home." "What kind of story interests you most?" It was a simple question, but to Helena it sounded like a revolution. Someone wanted to know what she liked, what sparked her curiosity, what made her dream beyond the suffocating walls of her reality. Stories of people who managed to change their lives. The answer came out more honest than she intended. People who start out one way and end up completely different. Gail watched her in the rearview mirror, capturing the intensity behind her seemingly simple words. There was a thirst for transformation there that touched him deeply. "Transformation is always possible, Helena. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us first." When they got close to her house, Helena asked to get off a few blocks earlier. She didn't want her father to see the car. She didn't want to have to explain where that ride had come from. Gail understood without her having to explain. "Helena," he called after her when she had her hand on the doorknob, "if you ever need anything at all, my card is here." He held out a small rectangle of paper. "It doesn't have to be anything specific. Sometimes we all need someone to talk to." She took the card with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of that gesture far beyond the paper. It was the first time in her life that someone had offered her a way out, an alternative. C door that she could open if she needed it. That night, Helena tucked the card between the pages of her only book, a worn edition of The Tenement she had received at school. For the first time in months, she fell asleep, thinking about possibilities instead of just survival. Gael, for his part, drove home with a strange feeling in his chest. There was something about that girl that awakened instincts in him that he didn't know he still had. It wasn't physical attraction. She was clearly underage and too vulnerable for that. It was something deeper, an almost visceral need to protect, to offer security, to be the person she clearly needed in her life. Arriving at his apartment in downtown Petropolis, Gael poured himself a whiskey and spent a long time on the balcony, watching the city lights. He had decided something on that car ride. He would not abandon Helena to her fate. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way to help her achieve the transformation she so desired. What he didn't imagine was that this decision would lead him to discover secrets about his own past that would completely change the way he saw that girl and the role that destiny had reserved for both of them in that small mountain town. The following weeks brought a subtle but noticeable change in Helena's routine. Gael began to appear more frequently around the school, always with a plausible excuse. He had a meeting downtown. He would pass by casually. He would offer her a ride when the weather threatened to turn. Helena, in turn, began to look forward to these encounters with an anxiety that scared and excited her at the same time. During these conversations in the car, she discovered facets of herself that she never knew existed. Gael had a gift for asking questions that made her reflect on things she had never considered before, about her dreams, her opinions, her perspectives for the future. For the first time, Helena felt seen as a whole person, not just as a problem to be ignored or a target to vent frustrations on. "What would you do if you could choose any profession in the world?" he asked one rainy afternoon, as they waited for the storm to subside. Helena was silent for a long moment. The question seemed to come from another universe, a place where choices actually existed. "I think I'd like to write." Her answer came out hesitantly, as if she were admitting a secret. "To tell stories about people like me, people no one sees." Gael felt something tighten in his chest when he heard the naturalness with which she placed herself among the invisible. "You are not invisible, Helena. At least not to me." Those words echoed in her mind for days. For the first time, someone had validated her existence in a way that went beyond mere survival. She began to look at herself differently in the mirror, to notice details about herself that she had previously ignored. She began to take better care of her hair, to take an interest in clothes, to imagine what it would be like to be seen as a woman, not just as a haunted girl. Gael, in turn, found himself increasingly involved in the young woman's life. There was something about her that aroused in him a complex mix of feelings, protection, admiration, and something more disturbing that he refused to name. He began to discreetly investigate her family situation, and what he discovered left him deeply disturbed. The neighbors whispered about the screams coming from the Cardoso house, about the scars that Helena sometimes brought to school, about Laura's strange death, which had officially been an accident, but which had left many questions unanswered. Gael felt a growing rage as he realized that such a special girl was being systematically destroyed by someone who was supposed to protect her. It was on a Thursday that everything changed. Helena arrived at school with a barely concealed bruise on her face and her hands visibly shaking. When Gael saw her in that state, something broke inside him. There was no longer any way to pretend that he could keep his distance, that he could help only with conversations and occasional rides. "Helena, what happened?" He stopped the car as soon as she got in, turning completely to face her. "Nothing." The automatic reply came out, but his voice broke mid-word. "Don't lie to me." Gael's voice came out firmer than he intended. "Someone hurt you." Helena stared at him for a moment, and Gael saw something shatter in those dark eyes. It was as if all the defenses she had built up over the years crumbled at once. Tears began to stream silently down her face, and she began to count. She told him about her father's drinking, about the violence that had become routine, about the constant fear about her mother's death that no one questioned, but that haunted her every night. She told him about the years of silence, about the feeling of being trapped in a life she had not chosen, about the despair of not seeing a way out. Gael listened to each, word with a mixture of anger and helplessness that made him physically nauseous. When she finished, he reached out and gently touched her bruised face. It was the first touch between them, and they both felt an electricity that went far beyond the gesture of comfort. "This can't go on, Helena. You don't deserve to live like this. There's nothing to be done." She pressed her face against his hand, feeling for the first time the warmth of a touch that didn't hurt. "I'm underage. I have nowhere to go. I have no one. You have me." The words were out before Gail could think of the consequences. "I'll find a way to get you out of this situation." That night, Gail couldn't sleep. He stayed up planning, researching, trying to find legal ways to help Helena. He called lawyers, social workers, and acquaintances who worked in child protection, but all the options seemed too bureaucratic, too time-consuming, too uncertain. Helena, at home, also spent the night awake, but for the first time in years it wasn't out of fear. It was out of hope. Someone had finally seen her pain, had validated her suffering, had promised to help. And there was something else, something that scared and thrilled her simultaneously. For the first time in her life, she had felt the touch of a man who didn't want to hurt her. When she finally fell asleep, Helena dreamed of gentle hands, of voices that didn't shout, of a future where she didn't have to hide. She dreamed of Gail, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be cared for, to be protected, to be loved. What neither of them imagined was that the events of the previous night had set in motion a series of events that would lead them to discover connections between their pasts that would completely change the nature of what was emerging between them. Gael spent the next few days in a state of restlessness that bordered on obsession. The image of Helena hurt wouldn't leave his mind, and he found himself cancelling important meetings to stay close to her school, just to make sure she was okay. There was something about that girl's vulnerability that awakened instincts in him that he didn't know he had, an almost primitive need to protect that disturbed him deeply. It was during one of these silent vigils that he decided to delve deeper into the Cardoso family's past. Gael had contacts in the city, people who could give him information without asking too many questions. What he discovered left him astonished, and at the same time connected dots from his own past in a way that made him question whether that encounter with Helena had really been a coincidence. Laura Mendez had been his first love. 22. Years ago, when they were both 20, they had an intense and passionate romance that lasted only 6 months, but that left a lasting impression on Gael in a way that no subsequent relationship could match. Laura was vibrant, dreamy, full of plans for the future. She wanted to be a teacher, travel the world, and build a family based on love and mutual respect. But her family had other plans. Antonio Cardoso was a more suitable suitor, hard-working, local, without any great ambitions that could take her away from Petropolis. When Laura's parents pressured her to date him, she gave in, breaking up with Gael in an abrupt way that left him devastated. He tried to convince her to run away with him, offered marriage, promised to give her everything she dreamed of. But Laura had already made her decision, influenced by family pressure and the fear of disappointing the people she loved. Gael left Petropolis soon after, built his career in Rio de Janeiro, and married a woman who never managed to completely fill the space Laura had left in his heart. He only returned to his hometown years later, already divorced, in search of a fresh start. When he found out that Laura had died, he felt an emptiness he didn't even know still existed. Now, looking at Helena, Gael saw unmistakable features of the woman he had loved, the same expressive eyes, the same quiet intensity, the same strength, disguised as fragility. The discovery that Helena was Laura's daughter hit him like a punch in the stomach, bringing with it a confusing mix of guilt, responsibility, and something more disturbing that he refused to analyze. Helena noticed the change in Gale's behavior before she even understood what was happening. He kept showing up, kept offering help, but there was a new tension in his posture, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. During their conversations in the car, she felt him studying her with a different intensity, as if he were searching for something specific in her face. "Did you know my mother?" The question came from Helena one afternoon when the tension became unbearable. She had noticed how Gale would tense up whenever Laura was mentioned, how his eyes would become distant when she talked about how much she missed her mother. Gale felt the world stop for a moment. He had prepared himself for this conversation, but the direct question still completely unbalanced him. "Why do you ask that?" "Because every time I talk about her, you act strange, like you know something I don't." Helena looked at him with the intensity she had inherited from her mother. "And because sometimes you look at me like you're seeing someone else." Helena's raw honesty shattered every defense Gale had built. He parked the car in a more private spot and turned to face her fully. "Yes, I knew your mother very well." For the next hour, Gale told her everything. About the love he had felt for Laura, about the plans they had made together, about how she had chosen safety over passion. He told her about how he had left the city with a broken heart, about how he had never been able to completely forget his first love. Helena listened to every word with a mixture of fascination and disturbance. Discovering that the man who had become so important in her life had such a deep connection with her mother created an emotional complexity that she didn't know how to process. At the same time, it explained the inexplicable intensity she felt towards Gale, as if she had known him from other lives. "So you helped me because of her?" The question came out loaded with a hurt that Helena didn't expect to feel. At first, maybe. Gale was brutally honest. "When I first saw you, it was like seeing Laura again. I thought it was a way to make amends for my past mistakes, to protect what I couldn't protect before. And now?" Gale looked into her eyes, seeing no longer just echoes of Laura, but Helena in all her complex and fascinating individuality. "Now I see you, not her, and what I feel is completely different from what I felt for your mother." The confession hung between them, loaded with implications that neither of them were prepared to face. Helena felt something move deep in her chest, a mixture of relief and terror at the realization that the confusing feelings she had been developing for Gale were reciprocated, even if in a way too complicated for any relationship manual. That night, they both went home carrying the weight of a truth that changed everything. Helena finally understood why she had felt so naturally drawn to Gale, why she had trusted him in a way she had never trusted any man. And Gale had to face the fact that his feelings for Helena went far beyond the desire to honor Laura's memory. Fate had woven a connection between them that was both redemption and damnation, and neither of them could pretend any longer that they could maintain the emotional distance that the situation demanded. The days that followed the revelation were filled with an almost palpable tension. Helena walked around the house like a ghost, lost in thoughts that made her alternate between confusion and an excitement that frightened her. Knowing that Gale had loved her mother created a web of contradictory emotions that she could not untangle. At the same time, his words constantly echoed in her mind. "Now I see you, not her." Gale, for his part, struggled with a guilt that grew with each passing day. He had started observing Helena because of Laura, but the feelings he now had for the young woman were too intense, too urgent to be just echoes of the past. She had become his own obsession, and the way his body reacted to her presence made him question his own moral sanity. It was on a rainy Friday that the situation reached its limit. Helena showed up at school with more obvious marks on her neck, poorly disguised by a high-necked blouse that could not completely hide the bruises. When he got into Gale's car, he felt such intense anger that he had to take several deep breaths to keep from leaving the place and going straight to Antonio's house. "I can't take it anymore." The words came out of Helena in a whisper filled with despair. Yesterday he almost killed me. He said I was just like her, that I would end up just like her. Gael felt his blood run cold. What do you mean by ending up like her? Helena stared at him with eyes that held years of suppressed terror. My mother didn't fall down the stairs, Gael. He pushed her. I saw it. The world stopped for a moment. Gael parked the car abruptly, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Did you see? Why didn't you ever tell anyone? I was 14. I was scared. And who would believe me against him? Helena began to cry, a decade of silence finally breaking. He said that if I told anyone, I would meet the same end as her. Ever since then, I've lived in fear that it would be my turn. Gael felt something break inside him definitively. There was no more room for hesitation, for social propriety, for considering the consequences. Helena was in real danger, and he was not going to allow the daughter of the woman he had loved to suffer the same fate as her mother. You're not going back to that house. The words came out firm, resolute. Not today, never again. I can't just disappear. I'm a minor. He'll look for me. What are you going to do? Publicly admit that you lost your daughter? Draw attention to yourself when you have so much to hide? Gael stared at her with a determination that surprised her. You're going to stay with me until we resolve this definitively. Helena felt a mixture of relief and terror. The prospect of not going home, of not facing another night, of fear was almost too good to believe. But at the same time, going to Gael's house meant crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. What if someone finds out? What if they think that I'm protecting a girl who's being beaten by her own father? Gael gently touched her bruised face. Let them think what they want. Your safety is more important than any gossip. That night, Helena found herself in a completely different environment from anything she had ever known. Gael's apartment was elegant but cozy, full of books and works of art that told the story of a life very different from hers. He prepared a guest room, brought clean clothes, and made a simple but careful dinner. During dinner, they talked about everything except the obvious situation. Gael told her about his business, about the trips he had taken, about the books he was sure she would like to read. Helena talked about school, about the dreams she had started to have since she met him, about how different she felt when she was with him. It was when they were washing the dishes together that it happened. Helena was drying a plate when she slipped slightly. Gael grabbed her by the shoulders to keep her from falling, and suddenly they were very close, breathing the same air, looking into each other's eyes with an intensity that they could no longer pretend didn't exist. Helena. Gael's voice came out hoarse, filled with a desire he struggled to control. I know, she whispered, not pulling away. I feel it too. The moment stretched out for an eternity, condensed into seconds. Gael fought against all the instincts that screamed to pull her closer, to kiss her, to finally give vent to what he had been feeling for weeks. Helena, in turn, experienced for the first time in her life the power to awaken desire in someone, to be seen as a woman instead of just a victim. You're too young. Gael finally managed to pull away, but his hands were still shaking. And I'm too old, and the whole situation is complicated, Helena finished, but there was no regret in her voice. But I can't pretend I don't feel anything. I can't pretend you're not the only person in the world who makes me feel alive. That night, they slept in separate rooms, but they both lay awake for hours, thinking about what had happened in the kitchen, what it meant, what it could become. Helena, for the first time in years, fell asleep feeling safe. Gael stayed up very late, fighting desires he knew were dangerous and feelings he could no longer deny. What neither of them imagined was that Antonio had already noticed Helena's absence, and that, in his mind, dulled by alcohol and anger, he was already planning ways to regain control over the daughter who had dared to defy him. Helena woke up one Saturday morning with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years: peace. The sun was streaming softly through the guest room window, and for a few seconds she almost forgot where she was. When reality returned, it brought with it a mixture of relief and anxiety. She was truly far from home, far from fear, but also in a situation she didn't know how to define or where it would lead. Gael was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, preparing breakfast with a dedication that touched her deeply. There was something deeply intimate about seeing him in that domestic setting, with his dress shirt half open and his hair slightly disheveled. Helena felt a wave of heat run through her body, a new awareness of herself as a woman that scared and excited her simultaneously. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, pouring coffee into a delicate cup that contrasted sharply with the chipped glasses she was familiar with at home. "Better than I've slept in years." The answer was too honest, loaded with a vulnerability that made Gale stop what he was doing to really look at her. There was something different about Helena that morning. Away from the oppressive environment of her father's house, she seemed to have recovered some of the naturalness that the violence had stolen from her. She smiled more easily, gestured as she spoke, expressed her opinions with a firmness that surprised them both. Over breakfast, they planned their next steps. Gale had consulted lawyers and discovered that, even though she was a minor, Helena could apply for judicial emancipation, especially considering the circumstances of abuse. But the process would be long, and in the meantime she needed a safe place to stay. "You can stay here as long as you need." The words came naturally, but they both felt the weight of the implications. "I have space, and I enjoy your company." Helena felt something warm in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone not only tolerated her but actually desired her presence. "I don't want to be a burden." "You are not a burden, Helena, never." Gale reached across the table, gently touching her fingers. "In fact, you brought something to this house that I didn't know was missing." The touch of their hands created an electricity that neither of them could ignore. Helena intertwined her fingers with his, feeling for the first time how a man's touch could be comforting instead of threatening. Gale fought the urge to bring that hand to his lips, to turn that tender moment into something more intense. The following days established a strangely domestic routine. Gale worked from home whenever possible so as not to leave Helena alone for too long. She cooked, organized the house, and voraciously read the books in his private library. At night, they watched movies together on the couch, talked about everything and nothing, and shared stories from their past lives. It was during one of these nights that Helena turned 18. She had not mentioned her birthday, but Gale had discovered the date in the documents he was organizing for the legal process. When he arrived home with a small but carefully chosen cake, she began to cry. "No one ever remembered my birthday." The words came out brokenly with tears. "My mother used to remember, but after she died." Gale pulled her into a hug that started out comforting but turned into something more urgent as Helena pressed herself against him with an intensity that spoke of years of emotional need. For the first time, she was in a man's arms by choice, not out of fear or submission. "You're 18 now," Gale murmured against her hair, breathing in the soft scent he had learned to associate with moments of peace. "You're officially an adult." Helena pulled back slightly to look him in the eye, and they both knew that something fundamental had changed in that moment. Age was no longer a barrier between them, at least not legally. What remained were only the emotional and ethical complexities of a situation that defied all social conventions. "Gale," she whispered, her voice filled with new determination. "I'm not a child anymore." "I know," he replied, fighting every instinct that screamed to kiss her right then and there. "But that doesn't make the situation any less complicated." Why does it have to be complicated? Helena touched his face with a boldness that surprised her. "You saved me. You protected me. You made me feel important for the first time in my life. Why can't I just love you?" The word hung between them like a confession that changed everything. Helena had finally named what she had been feeling, and Gale felt his last defenses crumble before the brutal honesty of that statement. "Because I loved your mother." He forced the words out, as if they could create the distance his body refused to maintain. "Because people will say I took advantage of you. Because the age difference, the circumstances, all of it is—" Helena interrupted him with a kiss. It was impetuous, inexperienced, but charged with a passion that years of repression had intensified. Gale stood still for a moment, shocked, before responding with an urgency that startled him. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. "I'm not my mother," Helena whispered against his lips. "And you're not my father. It's the two of us, here now. And I choose you." That night, for the first time, they slept in the same room. Nothing happened except shy caresses and kisses that spoke of future promises. But it was the first time that Helena fell asleep in someone's arms out of love, not out of fear. And Gale finally admitted to himself that he had fallen madly in love with the daughter of the woman he had once loved, and that this was at the same time the wrongest and most right thing that had ever happened in his life. The weeks that followed were the most intense of both of their lives. Helena blossomed in a way that surprised even Gale, who watched her transform daily. Far from the toxic environment of her parents' home, she revealed a vibrant, curious personality, passionate about life that had been systematically stifled. She read compulsively, asked questions about everything, and expressed opinions with a conviction that grew every day. Gale found himself completely involved in this transformation. He bought her books that he knew she would like, took her to places in Petropolis that she had never visited, introduced her to experiences that an 18-year-old girl should have had years before, but there was a constant tension between them, an attraction that grew exponentially with every accidental touch, every lingering look, every moment of emotional intimacy. It was on a rainy Thursday night that everything changed forever. Helena had cooked for him for the first time, a simple dish, but made with care that touched him deeply. During dinner, she talked about the plans she was making for the future, about the college preparatory course she wanted to take, about the dreams she finally allowed herself to have. "I want to study literature," she said, her eyes shining with a passion Gale hadn't seen in weeks. "I want to write about people like me, people no one sees. I want other girls to read my stories and know that it's possible to leave the place where they were born." Gale felt his chest tighten with pride. And something deeper, more possessive. "You will get everything you want, Helena. I'm sure of it. I'm sure because you made me believe it was possible." She got up from the table and walked over to where he was sitting, stopping right next to his chair. "You gave me a new life. You gave me hope. You gave me—" "What?" Gale asked, looking up and finding her eyes closer than he expected. "Love." The word came out as a whisper, but it was filled with a conviction that made Gale's heart race. "You taught me what it means to be truly loved." Helena leaned in and kissed him, but this time there was no hesitation or shyness. It was the kiss of a woman who knew what she wanted, who had decided to take control of her own life. Gale responded with an urgency he had been repressing for weeks, pulling her into his lap with a need that went far beyond the physical. "Helena," he murmured against her lips, his hands trembling as they caressed her delicate back. "Are you sure? Because if we continue, there will be no going back." "I want there to be no going back," she replied, looking straight into his eyes with a determination that completely disturbed him. "I want to belong to someone because I choose to, not because I was forced to. I want you to be the first man to touch me with love." The words hit Gale like a punch to the gut, reminding him of the violence Helena had suffered, of the purity that had been preserved in the midst of so much brutality, the responsibility of being the first to show her how beautiful physical love could be. Terrified and honored him simultaneously. That night, he carried her to his room with a reverence that bordered on the religious. Every touch was deliberate, every caress a promise of care and protection. Helena gave herself to him with a trust that broke him inside, offering her body as a sacred gift to someone who finally deserved to receive it. When they were finally united, Helena cried. Not from pain, but from deep relief and release. For the first time in her life, her body was hers, given by her own choice to someone who truly loved her. Gale held each tear as if it were diamonds, whispering words of love and promises of eternal protection. "You're mine now," he murmured against her skin, still trembling with the intensity of what they had shared. "I always have been," Helena replied, snuggling against his chest, "since the first day you really saw me." In the days that followed, they lived in a bubble of intimacy and mutual discovery. Helena blossomed under Gale's care, revealing a natural sensuality that, had been brutally repressed. Gael found himself more in love than he had ever been, completely devoted to the woman who had become the center of his universe. But reality wouldn't allow them to remain in that bubble forever. Antonio had begun, asking questions around town, looking for Helena in a way that suggested more anger than paternal concern. Neighbors talked about a drunken man who knocked on doors, making accusations about rich men stealing innocent girls. It was on a Tuesday morning that the first stone was thrown at Gail's apartment window. Along with it was a note written, in crooked handwriting, "Give me back my daughter or you will regret it." Helena read the note, feeling her blood run cold in her veins. The peace she had found with Gail seemed too fragile in the face of the threat her father posed. But for the first time in her life, she was not alone in facing Antonio Cardoso. She had someone by her side, willing to fight for her, to protect her, to do anything necessary to keep her safe. "He won't tear us apart," Gail said, pulling her into his arms as he looked at the shards of glass scattered across the floor. "Not after everything we've built together." Helena pressed herself against him, feeling for the first time that she had something worth fighting for. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She was a woman in love, willing to face any obstacle to preserve the love she had found and that had completely transformed her. What neither of them imagined was that Antonio's obsession would lead them to discover secrets about Laura's death that would change not only their lives, but the entire perception that the city had of the Cardoso family. Antonio's threats intensified in the weeks that followed. They weren't just anonymous notes or stones thrown at windows. He had begun a smear campaign around town, spreading rumors about Gail having seduced and corrupted a minor. The gossip spread like wildfire in a small town where everyone knew everyone else, and where other people's lives were the main entertainment. Gail began to lose clients. Important contracts were cancelled without explanation, meetings were called off, and he felt judgmental looks everywhere he went. The reputation he had built over the years was being systematically destroyed by a man who used his own daughter as a weapon of revenge. Helena felt torn between guilt and anger. She saw the man she loved being publicly crucified for having protected her, and the injustice of the situation made her want to shout the truth to the entire city. But Gail insisted on protecting her, preventing her from exposing herself any more than she already was. "He's destroying you because of me," Helena said one night, watching Gail hang up on yet another contract-canceling call. "Maybe I should go home, explain that—" "No." Gail's answer was firm, almost aggressive. "You will not go back to that man. Ever. We will find another way to resolve this." It was then that Helena made the decision that would change everything. If Antonio wanted to use lies to destroy their lives, she would use the truth to destroy his. She was 18 years old, a legal adult, and she had witnessed a murder that the entire town had accepted as an accident. The next morning, without telling Gail, Helena went to the police station. She asked to speak to the officer, and with a calmness that surprised her, she told him everything. The domestic violence, the years of fear, and especially the night she saw her father push her mother down the stairs and then act out the accidental. Inspector Carvalho, an experienced man who had always been suspicious of the official version of Laura's death, listened to every word with increasing attention. There were details in Helena's account that only an eyewitness would have known, inconsistencies at the crime scene that he had noticed at the time, but had no evidence to challenge. "Why didn't you say this before, girl?" he asked gently. "Because I was afraid," Helena answered with brutal honesty. "Because I was a child and he threatened to kill me if I told. But now I'm 18, I have someone to protect me, and I can no longer let him destroy innocent people's lives to hide his own crimes." The official reopening of the case into Laura Cardoso's death caused an earthquake in the small town of Petropolis. The city that had spent weeks whispering about Gail and Helena now had something much more scandalous to discuss. The investigation brought to light disturbing details about the Cardoso family's lives that many would rather not know. Neighbors who had pretended not to hear the screams for years now came forward as witnesses. The doctor who had certified the accidental death admitted that he had had doubts at the time. Evidence that had been overlooked was re-examined in a new light. Antonio, upon discovering that Helena had testified, went into a state of fury that bordered on madness. He showed up drunk at Gail's apartment door on a rainy night, shouting accusations and death threats. When Gail opened the door, he found a completely distraught man, wielding a rusty knife. "You stole my daughter!" Antonio yelled, staggering, but holding the gun steady. "You corrupted her, turned her against me, now she wants me in jail." "She is not your property, Antonio," Gail replied with a calm he did not feel, keeping himself between the armed man and Helena, who had hidden behind him. "And you know very well why she left home." Lies, all lies. Antonio advanced with the knife, but years of alcohol had made his movements uncoordinated. Gail managed to disarm him easily, but not before the man fell and hit his head on the corner of the coffee table. Blood spread quickly across the wooden floor. Antonio was unconscious but breathing. Gail immediately called 911 and the police, but Helena stood there staring at her fallen father, a complex mix of fear, pity, and relief taking over her. "It's over." Gail pulled her into his arms as they waited for the ambulance. "It's all over, Helena. You're free." Antonio survived, but was left with neurological damage that left him partially incapacitated. During his recovery in hospital under police custody, more details about his crimes came to light. Laura had left a diary hidden in the floorboards of the house, documenting years of abuse and threats. In it there were references to Gail, the love they had shared, and the fear she felt of her abusive husband. The entire city had to re-evaluate its opinions about Helena and Gail's story. What had seemed like a scandal turned out to be a story of rescue and true love. The same people, who had whispered criticism, now expressed admiration for the young woman's courage and the nobility of the businessman who had risked everything to protect her. Helena finally allowed herself to cry for everything she had lost and everything she had gained. In Gail's arms, she said goodbye to the haunted girl she had been and fully embraced the strong woman she had become. The truth had been her most powerful weapon, and she had used it to not only free herself, but to honor the memory of the mother who had not been able to escape in time. "Now we can really start our life together," Gail murmured against her hair, finally feeling that the ghosts of the past were being exorcised. Helena nodded, knowing that the hardest battles were behind her. What was coming now was the sweetest part, building a future based on the love that had been born from the ashes of 2 destroyed lives and that had proven strong enough to survive any storm. 6 months after the confrontation with Antonio, Petropolis had become a different city for Helena and Gail. The trial had been quick and conclusive. Antonio was convicted of intentional homicide and domestic violence, receiving a 15-year prison sentence. The neurological aftereffects of the accident left him with speech and movement difficulties, making him a pathetic shadow of the violent man who had terrorized his own family. Helena felt no pleasure in her father's condemnation, but she experienced something even more powerful: complete liberation. For the first time in her life, she could walk the streets without fear. She could sleep without nightmares. She could plan for the future without the constant shadow of violence hanging over her head. Her relationship with Gail had matured in an impressive way. What had begun as protection and gratitude had blossomed into a solid partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. They had faced public scrutiny, trials, and financial hardships caused by the smear campaign together, and had come out stronger on the other side. Gail had lost many clients during the scandal, but he had also gained others, people who admired his integrity and courage to do what was right, regardless of the personal consequences. His business was slowly recovering, and he found that valuing quality over quantity of clients made his work more satisfying. Helena had enrolled in a college, preparatory course, and studied with a dedication that impressed even her teachers. She now had clear goals. She wanted to study literature, specialize in Brazilian literature, and eventually write about experiences like hers. She wanted to give a voice to silenced women, tell stories of overcoming obstacles that could inspire other girls to find the strength to change their realities. It was on a Sunday afternoon while they were studying together on the apartment's balcony, that Gail asked the question he had been rehearsing for weeks. "Helena, have you thought about what you want our future together to be like?" She looked up from her books, noticing something different in his tone. "What do you mean?" Gail closed his laptop and turned to face her fully. "I want to tell you that I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. I want to tell you that you have made me a better man. I want to tell you that I can't imagine my life without you." Helena felt her heart race, realizing where the conversation was leading. "Gail, marry me." The words were simple, direct, and filled with an emotion that brought tears to her eyes. "Not now. Not until you've finished college and are absolutely sure of what you want. But promise me that when the time comes, you'll marry me." Helena was silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. It wasn't just a marriage proposal, it was a promise of the future, a declaration, that he was willing to wait as long as it took for her to fully become the woman she wanted to be. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You know I'll always carry this story this past. People will always comment on how we met, on the age difference, on—" "I don't care what people say," Gail interrupted, taking her hands in his. "I care about you, about us, about the life we can build together." Helena began to cry, but they were tears of pure joy. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her not just love, but a real, tangible future based on free choices and mutual consent. "Yes," she whispered, throwing herself into his arms. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build a family based on love, on respect. I want our children to never know the fear I knew." They held each other for a long time, whispering to each other about the life they would build together. Gail talked about the house he wanted to buy, with a large garden where she could write outdoors. Helena talked about the books she wanted to write, about the lectures she wanted to give in schools, about how she wanted to use her experience to help other girls in similar situations. That night, they made love with a different intensity, filled not only with passion, but with promises for the future. Helena surrendered herself, knowing that she belonged completely to that man who had risked everything to save her, and Gail possessed her with the certainty that she was the destiny he had waited for his entire life. A few weeks later, Helena received a letter that would change her relationship with the past forever. It was from an aunt she barely knew, her mother's sister who lived in São Paulo. The woman had followed the trial in the newspapers and wanted to meet her niece. During the emotional encounter, the aunt revealed secrets about Laura that Helena had never known. Her mother had been a strong, dreamy woman in her youth, much like who Helena was becoming. She had written poems, dreamed of being a teacher, and had loved intensely before feeling compelled to accept the arranged marriage with Antonio. "Your mother would be proud of who you've become," her aunt said, holding Helena's hands. "She always said you had fire in your eyes, that one day you would find the strength to break the cycle." Helena returned to Petropolis carrying a sense of completeness she had never known was possible. She had made peace with her past, had found her true family in Gail, and was building a future that honored both her mother's memory and her own dreams. That night, as they ate dinner in the kitchen that had become the heart of their new life, Helena looked at Gail and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. She was no longer the haunted girl he had met at the market. She was a strong, passionate woman, ready to conquer everything life had to offer, with the man who had turned her darkness into light by her side. 2 years later, Helena stood on the balcony of the apartment she now officially shared with Gail, holding in her hands the first copy of her recently published book. The Windows That Never Opened had been published by an independent publisher owned by a friend she had met in college, and even though it was a small print run, it represented the realization of a dream that had seemed impossible that distant morning at the municipal market. The cover featured a delicate image, a half-open window with golden light escaping through the cracks. Helena had insisted on this image because it perfectly symbolized her journey, the passage from the claustrophobic darkness of her childhood to the light of the freedom she had achieved. Gail came home from work and found her there, still contemplating the book with a mixture of pride and disbelief. At 20, Helena had become a stunning woman, not only physically, but radiating a confidence and inner strength that made her shine in any setting. The haunted girl had given way to a promising writer, an activist for women's rights, a speaker sought after by schools and organizations. "How do you feel?" he asked, hugging her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. As if I had finally found my voice. Helena leaned against him, feeling the familiar solidity of that body that had become her safe haven. And scared, and excited, and grateful. Helena's book was a fictional narrative based on her own experience, but written in a way that protected her privacy while offering hope to other women in similar situations. It told the story of a girl who finds the strength to break the cycle of violence with the help of a man who sees her not as a victim, but as a whole person, worthy of love and respect. The reception was surprisingly warm. Local bookstores hosted book signings that quickly sold out. Schools invited Helena to give talks on domestic violence and women's empowerment. The book began to circulate from hand to hand, especially among young women who identified with the protagonist. It was during one of these lectures that Helena met Mariana, a 16-year-old girl who approached her after the presentation. The girl bore the same marks that Helena had borne, the hunched shoulders, the shifty gaze, the long sleeves even in the heat. But there was something different. Hope in her eyes. "Your book made me believe that it is possible to get out," Mariana whispered, as if she were confessing a dangerous secret. "I have a similar situation at home and—" Helena felt her heart sink. It was the first time she had seen herself in that role, being the person another girl looked to for hope. She spent 2 hours talking to Mariana, guiding her through available resources, how to seek help and how to maintain hope even in the darkest moments. When she arrived home that night, Helena hugged Gail with an intensity that surprised him. "Today, I understand why all this happened," she said, tears streaming freely. "Why I went through all that, why I found you, why I survived. It was so I could help other girls like me." Gail held her, understanding the magnitude of what she had discovered about her life's purpose. The woman in his arms was no longer just the girl he had saved, but a force of nature capable of saving others. 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning in Landwehrminter's Petropolis, Helena wore a simple but elegant dress chosen by herself and paid for with the money she had earned from her own work. There was no paternal family to walk her down the aisle, but that didn't matter. Her aunt from São Paulo was there, as were some friends from college, Gail's work colleagues who had become true friends of the couple. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the same square where they had first met. Helena had insisted on this location because she wanted to honor the moment that had changed both of their lives forever. When the justice of the peace asked her if she would accept Gail as her husband, Helena looked into the eyes of the man who had been her savior, her protector, her first love, and would now be her partner for life. "I accept." The word came out loaded with absolute certainty, with infinite gratitude, with love that had matured through the greatest possible adversities. Gail, in turn, saw in the woman before him not just the girl he had met at the market, but the person who had given new meaning to his own existence. She had taught him that true love was not possession, but liberation. It was not control, but mutual empowerment. During the simple party that followed, Helena gave a speech that left everyone present moved. "I didn't grow up believing in happy endings," she said, holding Gail's hand. "I grew up believing that life was about survival, that love was synonymous with pain, that women like me weren't entitled to dreams. This man taught me that I was wrong. He taught me that we deserve to be loved for who we are, not for what we can offer. He taught me that it's possible to rewrite our own story, no matter how dark it started." That night, in their newlywed bedroom, Helena and Gail made love with the intensity of someone who knew they had found something rare and precious. They were two people who had saved each other, who had transformed trauma into strength, who had built a solid love on the ruins of lives that could have been wasted. 5 years later, Helena would become one of the most respected voices in the women's rights movement in Brazil. She would write 3 more books, all bestsellers. She would create a foundation to help girls in situations of domestic violence. Gail would be her partner not only in her personal life, but also in her professional life, managing the foundation's business with the same dedication he had devoted to protecting her. But on that first night as husband and wife, they were just Helena and Gail, 2 people who had proven that true love can flourish even in the most arid soils, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes fate uses the most unlikely circumstances to unite 2 souls who were made to complete each other. The girl with the closed windows had finally found her light, and had used it not only to illuminate her own life, but to show the way to countless other women who still lived in darkness, waiting their turn to discover that they too deserved to see the sun.